everyone, Pam Gregory, astrologer. I'm going to be speaking to you today about the first half of July and the lunar eclipse that we have coming up in Capricorn on the 4th or 5th, depending on where in the world you live. Now, before I get into that eclipse, just looking broadly down the timeline for the second half, because we're midpoint in the year now, looking down the timeline to the second part of 2020, it is extremely dynamic. We have a lot of dynamic cardinal energy happening with the astrology. That is partly because Mars on the 28th of June is entering its own warrior sign of Aries. Normally Mars will stay in a sign for about 6 weeks. It's going to stay in its own sign of Aries for 6 months, and it's pretty rare that it stays in its own sign. And part of the reason it's staying there so long is it's moving retrograde from the 9th of September to the 13th of November. And obviously that's over the US election period as well. Now, when a planet is retrograde, it means it's closer to the Earth and its symbolism is felt more strongly. So Mars in Aries, very much this warrior energy, but it's very good initiatory energy. See where Aries falls, the sign of Aries falls in your chart, and if you don't know where it falls, you can download a free birth chart from my website, pamgregory.com, and go to this link above and get a 2-part teaching video series from my store, and that will explain everything you need to know about what this update means for you, and you can use it for every update I ever do. If you've got a what does it mean for me question, that's the place to go. So very good for starting new projects, for initiating something, for driving something through. Very good at that. However, what it also means is that Mars in Aries is repeatedly through the second half of this year, particularly the autumn time, coming into a conjunction with Eris, goddess of discord and chaos, female awakener, linked to people taking to the streets in the US and Hong Kong, and they will both repeatedly square. In fact, Eris is running square all the time till October 2021, square to Pluto, but Mars energizes it by joining the party and squaring the January positions of Jupiter, Saturn, Pluto, and also their current positions. Now, Mars I see very much as the power of the individual. Capricorn I see as the power of the state, the power of government, the power of rules and regulations, people who tell you what to do. So this is where the action is, let's just say. Now, that very important Saturn-Pluto conjunction on the 12th of January that every astrologer has talked about ad infinitum, that was at 22 degrees of Capricorn. And that struck a tuning fork for the whole year. And I've talked about the themes of abuse of power being a very strong theme, and also the deconstruction of the old order. Now, it's interesting, I've mentioned before that the last time we had a conjunction between Saturn and Pluto was in Capricorn was in 1517, 1518. That was really at the beginning of the slave trade in America, and if we're thinking about a theme of abuse of power, I think it's very clear how that operated. So we've got that repeating theme this year. Now, so it was 22 degrees of Capricorn. So not only is Mars in the second half of this year repeatedly squaring the January positions, but the current positions, but it will also be returning to square 22 degrees of Capricorn in August, October, and December. Pluto will come back, will retrograde back to 22 degrees of Capricorn from August to November this year. But with Jupiter, it's happening earlier. Jupiter is retrograde, and it will be coming back to 22 degrees of Capricorn from the 8th to the 16th of July. So Mars energizes, Pluto intensifies, Jupiter expands. So we can go back to January and say what was happening at January with that strong bunching up of planets at 22 degrees of Capricorn. Well, one of the obvious things, obviously, was COVID-19, the coronavirus. So when Jupiter comes back, revisits that 22 degrees of Capricorn, in the first half of July, we're going to get a glimpse of what the autumn holds, but also some kind of revisiting of January. So it'll be very interesting to see how that plays out for us, a revisiting of January. So, as I say, it's very strong and dynamic energy. Now we still have Mercury goes direct on the 12th of July, goes direct at 5 degrees of Cancer, but we still have Jupiter, Saturn, Neptune and Pluto all retrograde for some time. So this is our turning inwards, this is our introversion, this is our really productive chrysalis that I've talked about. You know, our cave to create is what this is about. And for many people, lockdown has been an enormous challenge, but for some people, it's allowed them the time to really develop a stronger spiritual practice, to raise their frequency and really work on themselves. So try and focus on the positivity of that with these current retrograde planets, and use that chrysalis really productively to create our future direction. Because this eclipse period, actually, I'm going to talk about the lunar eclipse in a moment, but it's unusual to have 6 eclipses in a year. We have 3 eclipses at the moment in 5 weeks. It's incredibly intense. We feel as if we're passing through the eye of a needle. And when we have eclipses, the magnetic shield of the Earth, which is already dropping very significantly, drops even further. So the veil is thinner. We can access those subtle realms, that higher information for us. So whatever we are focusing on tends to magnify around eclipse time. So this is an incredibly rich, productive period to start to create our future. And the future isn't just tomorrow, next week. The future is for the very long term, decades and decades ahead of us. We are in the process of creating, because we're really in this kind of alchemy in 2020. It's intense all the way through, really. But if we understand the purpose of it, then we can work so powerfully with it. So just know that whatever you're thinking, whatever you're focusing on, whatever your emotional frequency is, that is going to become magnified because you're sowing your future. Okay. Then we have on the 4th of July, this happens at 9:44 p.m. Pacific, and on the 5th of July, UK time at 5:44 a.m., we have a lunar eclipse at 13 degrees 37 minutes of Capricorn. Now, Capricorn is about our practical security, and we can obviously see in many ways why people might be thinking about their practical security. At the solar eclipse in Cancer, it's our emotional security, our family, our roots, our tribe, our heritage. Now it's practical security. It's our homes and generally our feeling of safety in the world. Now, a lunar eclipse is a completion. It's a full moon always. It's a completion of the moon cycle. So it's an ending in that sense. So see where 1335 of Capricorn falls in your chart and anticipate what this closure, this culmination, this ending might be about for you. It is also a south node eclipse, because with an eclipse, the moon has to either be close to the north node or the south node. Here, it's close to the south node. Now, yes, it's a penumbral eclipse, so it isn't a total eclipse, but nevertheless, because it's a third eclipse in 5 weeks, it feels like a culmination. And indeed, any full moon is a culmination, to shine light on something that we may not have been aware of before. So it's a completion in that sense. It's conjunct the south node. It is also the last eclipse that we're going to have in Capricorn for 8 years until 2028. We are aware that for the last 18 months, we've had the transiting nodal axis moving through Cancer and Capricorn. They always move through opposing pairs of signs. That shifted into Gemini in May, early May, Gemini and Sagittarius. But this is the last eclipse in Capricorn for you. So what has that 18-month theme been about? Look at the houses where Cancer and Capricorn fall in your chart. What has that been about for you? Because in looking at these layers of astrology, that's how we really get the deeper meaning. And again, if you don't know where they fall, get a free birth chart and get the teaching videos I was mentioning earlier. Now, there could be angry words around the time of this eclipse. We've got Mars in Aries square to Mercury in Cancer. We may have some of that. Strong Capricorn energy. We've got the Moon, Jupiter, Saturn, and Pluto in Capricorn. And by the way, if we're thinking also of endings, Saturn is at 29 degrees and 46 minutes of Capricorn. So 29 degrees is what's known as the anaretic sign. It's the last degree of any sign, and it tends to bring out the more shadow side of that sign. So what is Capricorn about? It's about power and control, top-down control, rules and regulations, do as I say, the authorities, the police, that kind of thing. So a strong sense of all of those themes, particularly themes of endings as well at this time. This is particularly powerful for the United States because the 4th of July is Independence Day. That was really the birth of the current constitution in the US. The birth chart that many astrologers use, and I do too, was the 4th of July, 1776, Philadelphia, 1710 in the afternoon. That was the signing of the Declaration of Independence. So that birthed the current US. So this lunar eclipse in America is falling on that Independence Day. The lunar eclipse at 1337 of Capricorn is directly opposing the Sun in that US chart at 13 degrees of Cancer. Very often the Sun represents the leadership in the US. Thirdly, the path of the lunar eclipse goes principally across North America. A little bit across South America, a little bit across Southwest Europe and Africa, but the principal path of the eclipse is also across America. And as I've said in the past, where the path of the eclipse falls tends to manifest the themes that we're talking about here. So it's on Independence Day, it's opposing the Sun in the US chart, and the path of the eclipse is across the US. And if we look back, I've written about this in more detail for my July newsletter. If we look at when we've had a lunar eclipse at that degree before, that has been really very significant for the US. For instance, we had a lunar eclipse at 14 degrees of Capricorn in 1963, and that was the year just a little while later that JFK was assassinated, but also it was the Martin Luther King I Have a Dream speech, birth of something new in America. By the way, I'm not suggesting these events will happen. Again, all I'm saying is that these were very important events for the US. We also, just like we had a solar eclipse at 0 of Cancer, we had one of those in mid-2001, before 9/11. We also had a lunar eclipse on the 5th of July 2001 at 13 degrees 39 minutes of Capricorn, 2 minutes away from this one. And then we had 9/11 in the September of this year. So again, I'm not saying these events will specifically repeat, because it depends on our level of consciousness, and if we've raised our level of collective consciousness, they will manifest differently. But what I am saying, this is very important as an eclipse for America. It has resonated to that 13-14 degrees of Capricorn eclipse set for quite some time. And again, as I say, I quote more examples in the newsletter. So the other reason it's very important for the US is, as many of you will be aware, the US is moving into what is known as its Pluto Return. In July 1976, when the US, as we know it today, was born, Pluto was at 27 degrees of Capricorn. That is falling in its second house of the country, second house of money and values. So as we move through the next few years, it doesn't become exact until 2022 that Pluto returns to 248-year orbit. There may be issues around the economy, but also issues around values. Who are we? as a country, maybe something Americans are thinking. What do we stand for? What are our values? Now we're going through this rebirth, if you like. Now, although Pluto doesn't reach 27 of Capricorn, as I say, until 2022, Jupiter and Saturn have already reached those degrees and then retrograded. They've got to that 27 and retrograded. They'll be coming back to that 27 degree point of Capricorn in November and December this year. So they're kind of, again, another glimpse what is being activated on that natal, let's call it natal Pluto for the US. Now, Pluto, as I've spoken many times, is about power, top-down power. It's about control. It's about deep, dark secrets that have been repressed for a long time. It can be might makes right. It can be brutality. Particularly secrets of the rich and powerful can tend to come out now. But it's always a process of purging and detoxing. Whether it's individual or collective or a country, it's bringing up issues from the past which need to be looked at in daylight, as it were. Lunar eclipse shines a light, full moon shines a light on anything which needs to be purged from that country. So that is the deeper, longer term process that we are going through. So this deconstruction of the old order that we're seeing globally, we can see it every day in many, many countries, and I don't think we need to explain that. It's very clear that governments aren't functioning very well. The structures and foundations of our society that gave it order and sense are being very challenged at the moment. One of the big ways they're being challenged is the square from Eris in Aries, which I've talked about. It's going to be energized by Mars in this second half. So that form of deconstruction is going to accelerate. There's another theme in here as well, because transiting Neptune is squaring the transiting nodal axis in Gemini and Sagittarius. Now, it isn't exact yet. It will become exact, that square, in January, but it's already operational. And this is partly what is causing the truth-untruth. I've got clarity, now I've got silt. Now I've got fog. I've got clarity again, now I've got fog. So as more information is coming into us via the North Node in Gemini, we may be reaching head-spinning proportions in our old world views, South Node Sagittarius in the past, being shattered. What we thought the world was, how we thought the world was operating in terms of reality, all of a sudden isn't, because we've got new information. And that is exacerbated by these issues of trust and betrayal with transiting Neptune square, the transiting nodal axis. So that's another whole theme as part of this overarching deconstruction of the old order. So in the middle of this year here, now the 2020 will be an incredibly fast-moving, accelerated year in terms of the themes I've talked about. I'm not necessarily saying that the deconstruction will be complete by the end of 2020. I think it may take until Pluto finally leaves Capricorn in 2024 for that process to happen, but this is the big year for that. But equally, I think we have some amazing signs of hope here, because really we have a T-square. As Eris in Aries squares the Capricorn planets, talked about that. We also have Haumea, the dwarf planet that I've mentioned a couple of times, at 27 of Libra, opposing Eris, squaring the Capricorn planets. Now Haumea, way out in our solar system, is an exquisite archetype of fertility, very linked to the Hawaiian goddess of fertility. She's even egg-shaped. Excuse me. She's even egg-shaped, but in myth she could birth children from various parts of her body. She could regenerate herself from an old woman to a young maiden, but she was magical in being able to regenerate nature. When fields were laid bare with bad agricultural practices, she had a magic stick called a macaline. She could just instantly bring wild food onto the table. She could just regenerate nature and seafood too with her magic stick, the macaline. And I think even during lockdown, when we've had less pollution, less air and car travel, we've seen how nature has just resurged with incredible speed. Wildlife, much more prominent, we can see all around us. So this is the promise of the new that has a magical quality, a quantum jump quality. Equally, what is very exciting is that this lunar eclipse at 1337 of Capricorn is directly opposing Sirius, the brightest star in the sky. So the sun is conjunct Sirius here. Now, Sirius is the closest star really to our Earth, and it is also very connected to ancient Egypt. It is very bright, it looks often white or yellow, and it has a kind of purging of the old quality because of its heat, burning away the old, kind of purification process. But in myth with ancient Egypt, it was very linked to their agriculture, very linked to the state of the Nile, the River Nile, that was so crucial for their agriculture. But it is also in myth, Egyptian myth, linked to the goddess of Isis. Sirius was known as the star of Isis. Now, many of you may feel a close connection to Isis. I know I do, but she was the goddess of renewal. So again, we have this beautiful quality, and I talked about some of these qualities with the other. If you look at the new planetary archetypes video that I did a little while ago, and I'll put the link below for that, some of these dwarf planets, these new archetypes we're discovering have this magic, but they have a quantum leap. It's not slogging away in 3D, it's not linear, it's not gradual, it's a magical jump. And we get to that magical jump through using our frequency properly. So this is a year of mastering our frequency for sure. As we move more planets into Aquarius at the end of this year, Aquarius is all about frequency. It's ruled by Uranus, frequency and vibration, and we are increasingly going to understand that everything in the world is vibrating energy. Everything. Many of us understand this very well already. So if we can turn our focus to these finer energies that I've talked about, Haumea, Sirius, the other dwarf planet archetypes I've mentioned in the other video, we can start to, whatever is collapsing behind us in the crumbling buildings, the dust, if we can just say, okay, I'm going to set my GPS to this frequency of love, of freedom, of gratitude, of joy, of divine neutrality even. So I'm aware of what's happening in the world, I'm aware there's a bigger plan, and despite that, I can still keep on track with my GPS, with my frequency. That's my trajectory, because I am going to trust that is going to take me to an amazing place in terms of creating a better world. I'm just going to hitch my star to that wagon and know that by the laws of physics, that is going to pull something better into manifestation, and it's going to happen quickly. It's going to be accelerated. Doing stuff in 3D is super, super slow, heavy, laborious. We're headed to something finer, lighter, quicker, that brings manifestation very easily. So feel that sense of being a galactic citizen. Feel that sense of being, a wonderful term by Peggy Black and the team that she channeled was star beings. We are awakened star beings now. Get into that sense and really have this sense of playing in the cosmos and understanding energy to the advantage of us all. So I hope that's been helpful. A lot there today. Very exciting pivot point of the old and the new. And don't look back. Just keep on creating that future and make that your discipline at this time of intense eclipses and magnification of whatever we're planning to manifest. Okay, wonderful to speak with you. Have a powerful, wonderful lunar eclipse in Capricorn on the 4th and 5th. And thanks for listening. Bye for now.